All right, hello and welcome. This is a discussion officially about Jonas, or the artist at work. I wanted to touch on this theme of a theme that Patrick has been bringing up over the past sessions on as we were discussing Camus, the theme of Sisyphus, the myth of Sisyphus and the rock. And the rock here, in the case of Jonas, is the star.
Mm.
Is the big rock that is out there. He keeps returning to, keeps in some ways pushing against, or he push himself uh, while having in mind his star. And his star also does something. One of the things that he does, other than giving him this naivete, this sense of, I'm fine. I'm gonna be okay. I'm destined to be an artist. But in some ways, it gives him an advantage, a kind of ahistorical, an advantage of being somewhat ahistorical, not being trapped by the trends, historical trends, what is fashionable philosophically or artistically around him. So I wanted to, this round, I wanted to read with you this passage. This is about his wife and his relationship with his wife, Lewis. And then I found that this satirical element that you touched on. I also found that specifically he's satirizing Sartre, de Beauvoir and Sartre in this passage. We read, Jonas admired her, Lewis, and decided that he was definitely, now he himself was definitely exempt from reading since Lewis kept him sufficiently informed and up to date on the basics of contemporary discoveries. You mustn't say, Lewis announced, that someone is bad or ugly, but that he chooses to be bad or ugly. This
Mhm.
is like hard to hard to
Hmm.
miss. The distinction was important and might well lead, at the very least, as Rateau pointed out, to the condemnation of the human race. But Louis settled the matter by pointing out that since this truth was supported by both the tabloid press and philosophical reviews, it was therefore universal and beyond dispute. And then Jonas's catchphrase here comes, "As you like," said Jonas, who immediately forgot this cruel discovery to dream on his star. So his star is a kind of way out of these short-term trends on, like, for now we should talk this way about human beings' badness or ugliness. We should talk about them choosing, and the condemnation. Man is condemned to be free. I don't know. Maybe it's still up to debate, but reading it, I saw connection to Sartre. I want to kind of backtrack on what I said about privilege. Maybe it wouldn't be fair because I think of maybe Dostoevsky might be better at that. He depicts characters that are also naive, also kind of out of touch with reality without having privilege. They just suffer.
Mm.
Jonas here has the privilege of not having to suffer, but there's still something tragic about his life. But that tragedy is not about pain or some urgent disaster facing him, some malady. It is, as Tyson said, as you said, uh, we can describe it as an absence of a narrative force, as a narrative structure, something that
Mm.
is missing, something that keeps encouraging him to look to his star because there's nothing to replace that star. Here is the other one, the other really entertaining, amusing, and when I think when we pay attention to the satirical, comedic aspect of this story, it doesn't eliminate the tragic components. I think satire highlights and intensifies tragedy. It's an element. It becomes integrated into a
Yeah.
tragic, uh, larger tragic narrative. So here, I think, yeah, this passage is about his interactions with his disciples, and he's reflecting to himself, and he says, "Quote: The artist in him was groping in the dark. How could he teach the true paths to his disciples?
Mm.
But he quickly understood that a disciple was not necessarily someone who aspired to learn something. More often, on the contrary, a person became a disciple for the disinterested pleasure of teaching his master. After that, Jonas could accept this surplus in honors with humility. The disciples explained to Jonas at length what he had painted and why.
mm,
That is so good. That is honestly to kind of confess this. I think this passage made me aware of my own kind of when I was a student. I always wanted to give my teacher good insights and kind of teach them something
mm,
and be useful to them in that way. Maybe that's something that becomes even stronger than wanting to learn from a teacher. So they gathered around him to explain what his own work to him. I was like, okay, as you like. There is a. You remember we talked about that funny phrase of the less people read, the more they buy books.
mm,
That that is mirrored in the production of the pace of his production, artistic production, productivity. On page my version, the Cosman translation, page 71, he writes, "As luck would have it, the less he worked, the greater his reputation grew." Isn't that a little bit like similar to the logic of the book purchasing and readership? As luck would have it, the less he worked, the greater his reputation. Maybe it's a logic of supply and demand. The less he supplied, the more the demand grew. Every
mm,
exhibition was anticipated and celebrated in advance. That was part of a general observation by Camus that how much a writer or an artist is celebrated doesn't really correspond to what they are actually doing.